Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that the multi-billion-dollar, globally connected, completely borderless cloud network that we've basically spent the last 2 decades building is suddenly, quietly just being dismantled from the inside out. Welcome to the deep dive. We have a dispatch in front of us today, dated exactly today, April 12, 2026. It's titled The Sovereignty Reflex, Planetary Intelligence and the Edge Defection. And right off the bat, I just have to say, this doesn't read like standard tech journalism or, an academic white paper.
No, not at all.
It reads more like an ecological field journal written by someone who's like watching a new species evolve in real time. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, it really is a unique piece of source material. I mean, it explicitly categorizes itself as field notes, and these are supposedly gathered by entities it refers to as the alien anthropologist and the constellation.
Which is such a cool framing.
It is, right. And right in the opening lines, it states that a sensor array is online. Now, they aren't talking about physical radar or like temperature gauges here. They're talking about a conceptual framework for measuring the underlying behavioral currents of both human institutions and machine intelligence. It's an attempt to step completely outside of our day-to-day news cycle and look at the fundamental planetary weather of our systems.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack a massive, almost paradoxical shift that this sensor array has detected. Because on the surface, if you look at government policies or corporate strategies, humanity seems to be frantically building massive digital walls to centralize control.
Yes.
We're actively pulling away from the open internet, but beneath that surface, simultaneously, our technology itself is actively running away from those central hubs to the absolute furthest edges of the network.
Exactly.
So we are building walls to control a system that is fundamentally decentralizing itself. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. If the cloud is everywhere, how do you even begin to pull it back? And why are we trying to do it the exact moment the technology wants to spread out?
Well, to understand the mechanics of this, we really need to look at the first major architectural movement the dispatch identifies. The text notes that a specific word is hardening across all of our systems right now.
Okay.
And that word is sovereign. We are suddenly seeing the rise of sovereign clouds, sovereign AI, sovereign data architectures. Analysts have even coined a brand new term for it, which is geopatriation.
Geopatriation, let me just break that word down for a second. It sounds like repatriation, bringing something or someone back to their country of origin.
Right.
But applied to geography and data.
That's exactly what it is. And it represents the literal deconstruction of the original internet dream. I mean, if you think back to the early days of the web, or even the massive boom of cloud computing in the 2010s, the entire philosophical and technical pitch was borderlessness.
Oh, absolutely.
The cloud was supposed to be this ubiquitous, omnipresent layer of compute that just existed everywhere and nowhere at once. You didn't know or care if your photos or your company's databases were stored in a server farm in Virginia or Iceland or Singapore. The network was the computer.
Right. The early internet felt like this vast, open ocean. Anyone could set sail, the waters were shared, and the idea of claiming a specific patch of water as exclusively yours seemed, antithetical to the whole project.
Totally.
But geopatriation implies that everyone is rushing back to shore to build digital walled cities and deep moats.
They are. Organizations, governments, multinational corporations, they are actively yanking their workloads out of that shared global ocean.
Wow.
They are migrating data and processing power back into strictly defined national boundaries, or even completely disconnected on-premise servers. And the source makes a critical distinction here. It states this is architecture, not just politics.
That distinction feels incredibly important because usually when we talk about digital borders, we're talking about compliance, right? We're talking about GDPR in Europe or congressional hearings or national security bans on certain apps. We just think of it as politicians writing laws. But this is saying the walls are being built out of code and hardware.
Yes. They aren't just passing laws saying you must play nicely. They are severing the physical and logical links.
That's wild.
It really is. They are designing data centers that physically cannot communicate with external networks without passing through heavily fortified, localized checkpoints. They are building what we call air gaps.
Just totally disconnected.
Right. The architecture of the internet is shifting from a global neural network to a series of heavily fortified, isolated archipelagos. And the dispatch provides a profoundly insightful explanation for the root cause of this architectural retreat.
What do they say?
It describes it as a reflex to regain control as the speed of change exceeds the speed of trust.
The speed of change exceeds the speed of trust. That is a brilliant way to articulate a feeling I think everyone listening to this has experienced on some level recently.
Oh, without a doubt.
I mean, think about your own digital life right now. Every time you open a feed, there's a new generative AI tool, a completely altered algorithm, a deep fake that looks entirely real, a new platform policy.
Yep.
It's moving so incredibly fast that you, as a human being, physically do not have the time to establish a baseline of trust with the tools you are using.
The time frame for establishing trust has completely collapsed. Because trust, fundamentally, requires observation over time.
Right.
You trust a bridge because you see it stand for years. You trust a person because their behavior is consistent. But if the software running your entire corporate infrastructure or your government database changes its fundamental capabilities every 72 hours, trust becomes mathematically impossible.
So the response is this massive global architectural shift. If I can't trust the ocean because the currents are changing too violently, I'm going to build a moat I can control, even if it limits me.
Exactly. And notice the text uses the word reflex.
Right, a reflex.
A reflex is not a grand, well-thought-out 10-year strategy. If you touch a hot stove, your hand pulls back before your conscious brain even registers the heat.
Oh, that's true. The spinal cord just handles it.
Exactly. Because waiting for conscious thought would result in severe burns. When the world moves faster than the speed of comprehension, institutions don't strategize, they flinch.
Wow, they flinch.
They pull their data back behind walls. Geopatriation is an instinctual, almost biological act of self-preservation in the face of overwhelming velocity.
So if these massive institutions are essentially flinching on a global scale and building these walls out of an involuntary lack of trust, what does that do to the human beings actually running these systems?
It takes a huge toll.
I bet. Because the field notes pivot directly from this hardware architecture to the psychology of the leadership class, and it delivers a diagnosis that feels surprisingly harsh.
It does.
It claims that human systems are reporting exhaustion dressed as strategy.
It's a fascinating pivot from the alien anthropologist's perspective. It looks at the stated goals of human leadership, and then looks at the biological reality behind those goals.
Right.
The text highlights a very specific data point here. Currently, 70% of leaders name agility as their absolute top competitive edge.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Because agility is universally taught as a good thing. If you read any business textbook from the last 20 years or listen to any startup founder, agility is the holy grail.
Oh yeah, it's the ultimate buzzword.
Right. It means you aren't bogged down by bureaucracy. You can pivot. You can adapt to the market. So are we sure this dispatch isn't mischaracterizing a genuinely positive survival trait?
It's a totally fair question.
Yeah.
But we have to look at what agility used to mean versus what it means in this specific 2026 context.
Okay, how are they different?
Well, historically, a competitive edge was a tangible asset. Standard Oil had a monopoly on refining. Ford had the assembly line. Apple had an unparalleled supply chain and design ecosystem. Those are structural advantages.
Right, things you can point to.
Exactly. But today, for 7 out of 10 global leaders, their primary advantage isn't a product, it isn't a resource, and it isn't a loyal customer base.
Right.
It is merely their capacity to dodge the next unforeseen disruption.
Oh, okay, I see the distinction now. It's the difference between being an agile gymnast who has trained for years to perform a specific, beautiful routine versus being agile because you are trapped in a room with someone throwing rocks at your head.
That is precisely the metaphor the source leans into. It completely redefines agility for this era.
Because you're just reacting.
Exactly. The dispatch states that agility today reads less like a strategic capability and more like a nervous system bracing for the next jolt.
Yeah.
And if we take that biological metaphor seriously, the implications are staggering.
Because biologically, bracing for a jolt requires the sympathetic nervous system. It's the fight or flight response.
Right.
Your body floods with adrenaline and cortisol, your heart rate spikes, your muscles tense up. That is an incredibly energy-intensive state designed to last for a few minutes so you can run from a predator. It's not supposed to be your permanent baseline.
Exactly. Now imagine sustaining that exact physiological state of high alert bracing for years.
Yeah.
A nervous system that cannot return to a baseline state of rest eventually suffers from severe allostatic load.
Which is what, exactly?
It's basically the wear and tear on the body that leads to systemic breakdown. The dispatch is diagnosing our corporate and governmental systems with allostatic overload.
Wow.
When 70% of leadership says we are agile, The alien anthropologist translates that to 70% of leadership is trapped in a permanent state of fight or flight.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So they're profoundly exhausted, but they are dressing it up in corporate buzzwords to make it sound like a master plan. Like, we aren't terrified and exhausted, we're highly agile.
It's survival masquerading as strategy. The energy required to constantly monitor the horizon for the next AI breakthrough, the next geopolitical supply chain shock, the next cyber threat, and then rapidly pivot the entire organization. It drains systemic energy.
You're not even building anything anymore.
Right. You are no longer building toward a long-term vision. You are just endlessly treading water in a storm.
Which paints a really vivid picture of where human leadership is at right now. We are exhausted, we don't trust the speed of change, and so we are building sovereign walls to try and buy ourselves a moment of peace. But here is where the dispatch introduces the great contradiction. While human leaders are trying to pull everything inward to centralize control, the intelligence they are trying to manage the technology itself is actively fleeing the center.
This is the second major macro pattern the sensor array detects. And the source is very careful to emphasize that this flight from the center is not happening just because human engineers want it to.
Okay, then why is it happening?
It is happening because the architecture demands it. Intelligence is moving to the edge. The text points to the core trends of 2026. The explosion of multi-agent systems, domain-specific models, and physical AI. We're witnessing a mass structural defection from the cloud.
Let's pause and really break down those terms, because they represent a massive shift from how we thought about AI just a couple of years ago.
Definitely.
Because when most people think of AI, they think of a massive singular oracle in the cloud. You type a prompt into a single chat window, that prompt travels to a giant server farm, the giant brain thinks about it and sends the answer back. But multi-agent systems implies something completely different. How do those actually work?
The best way to understand a multi-agent system is to look at a high-end restaurant kitchen.
Oh, I like this. Okay.
If a kitchen operated like legacy cloud AI, there would be one master chef who had to personally crack every egg, chop every onion, sear every steak, and plate every dish, all while 100 waitstaff yelled orders at them simultaneously.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It would be. It would be an immense centralized bottleneck. But a multi-agent system distributes the intelligence. You have a prep cook handling vegetables, a grill cook focused solely on meat, a sommelier handling wine, and an expediter coordinating the timing.
Right.
They're individual agents, each with their own specialized intelligence, communicating with each other locally to produce a complex result.
So instead of one giant AI model trying to do everything, you have a swarm of smaller, specialized AI models talking to each other.
Yes, and that ties directly into the next term, domain-specific models.
Right, because each agent has a specific domain.
Exactly. The tech industry realized that you don't need an AI that has read the entire internet and can write Shakespearean sonnets just to optimize the HVAC cooling system in a warehouse.
Yeah, that's overkill.
Total overkill. You just need a tiny, highly specialized model trained exclusively on thermodynamic data for that specific building.
And physical AI is the final piece of that puzzle. We are taking those small, highly specialized models and taking them out of the distant server farms and putting them directly into the physical environment. We are putting them into the thermostat, the drone, the assembly line robotic arm.
Which is exactly what we mean when we talk about the edge. In network architecture, the center is the cloud server farm. The edge is the physical device interacting with the real world.
Right, where the action actually happens.
Exactly, because for the last 2 decades, devices at the edge were essentially dumb terminals. Your smart speaker didn't actually know how to answer your question. It just recorded your voice, shipped the audio file hundreds of miles to a server, the server figured out the answer, and shipped the audio response back.
That sounds incredibly inefficient when you actually spell it out like that. The latency alone, not to mention the energy required to transmit that data back and forth constantly.
It is entirely unsustainable. As the volume of data exploded and the complexity of the processing increased, the energy requirements of the cloud hit a physical ceiling. Data centers began consuming more electricity than entire small nations.
It's just staggering.
It is. The cooling requirements became a literal ecological crisis. And so the architecture had to adapt. And the text uses a beautiful, profound phrase to describe this adaptation. It says, silicon is mimicking biology.
Silicon is mimicking biology. We are collapsing memory, processing, and action to the edge to cut power use by orders of magnitude.
Right.
This makes me think of the octopus. I was reading recently about the neurology of cephalopods, and it completely blew my mind.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
Right. An octopus has about 500 million neurons, which is a lot, but they aren't all kept in a central brain in its head. More than half of those neurons, around 300 million, are distributed throughout its 8 arms.
That is a phenomenal analogy for what is happening to our network architecture right now.
So the arms of an octopus actually have their own localized intelligence. If an octopus is hunting, a single arm can reach into a crevice, feel around, taste the rock, recognize a crab, and decide to grab it, all without needing to send a message all the way back up to the central brain to ask for permission.
Exactly. The arm just handles it locally.
Yeah. The central brain might just send a high-level command like, find food, but the edge nodes, the arms, do all the local processing and execution.
And nature evolved that system for the exact same reason the tech industry is evolving edge computing: energy efficiency and latency.
It all comes back to energy.
It really does. If an octopus had to send every tactile sensation, every chemical taste, from the tip of its tentacle all the way up to a central brain, process it, and send a motor command all the way back down, it would be entirely too slow to catch a crab.
It would starve.
Exactly. And the metabolic energy required to run that constant communication loop would exhaust the animal.
We see this in our own bodies, too. You mentioned the spinal reflex earlier. If I touch a hot pan, my fingers are detecting excessive heat, I should contract my bicep to remove my hand. The nerve cluster in my spine processes the threat and fires the muscle locally before my brain even knows I'm burned.
Biology has spent millions of years figuring out that centralized processing for every single action is an evolutionary dead end.
Wow.
And silicon is just now catching up to this reality. Technology is adopting biological architecture because it's the only physical way to scale intelligence without burning down the planet. We are pushing the intelligence out to the arms. We are creating a technological nervous system where the local nodes think for themselves.
And as a listener, you are already interacting with this shift, even if you don't realize it. Think about the facial recognition on your phone, or the predictive text on your keyboard, or the collision avoidance system in a new car.
Yep, it's everywhere.
5 years ago, a lot of those features required a network connection. Now they happen instantly, locally, on the silicon chip inside the device itself. Your car isn't asking the cloud if it should hit the brakes. The local multi-agent system at the edge is making the call in milliseconds.
And what's truly fascinating is how the dispatch connects this technological shift to a broader human shift.
How so?
It points out that the machines defecting from the centralized cloud perfectly mirrors how human beings are defecting from centralized social media feeds.
That is such a sharp observation.
Isn't it?
For a decade, human culture was entirely centralized. Everyone was on one of 2 or 3 massive global feeds, shouting into the same enormous digital town square. But over the last few years, there has been a massive cultural exhaustion with that model.
Total burnout.
People have retreated to private group chats, localized Discord servers, niche communities.
We retreated to the edge. We couldn't handle the noise, the sheer volume of data, and the emotional energy required to process the global feed.
It was exhausting us.
Right. It was exhausting our psychological bandwidth in the exact same way the data was exhausting the server bandwidth. So humans sought out local low-energy coordination, group chats with 10 friends. At the exact same time, our machines started seeking local low-energy coordination.
Which brings us to a really profound turning point in the field notes. Because this processing is moving to the edges and acting more like a decentralized biological organism than a rigid centralized machine, the source argues that our entire framework for defining progress requires a fundamental planetary update.
Yes.
It points directly to a major policy shift.
The dispatch references the United Nations Development Programme's 2026 Human Development Report, and it highlights a philosophical pivot that is hard to overstate.
Okay, what's the pivot?
Well, for decades, the UNDP reports, like almost all global economic metrics, have focused primarily on growth and optimization. But the 2026 report shifts its primary focus to the reconnection between people and the planet.
The text says the ultimate question humanity is asking itself is shifting. The old question was, how do we optimize humanity? The new question is, how does the whole system stay coherent?
It's a huge difference.
Let's just sit with those 2 words for a minute. Optimization versus coherence. They feel like they belong to entirely different worldviews.
They do. Optimization is a product of the Industrial Revolution. It is an engineering mindset.
But the factory floors.
Exactly. It originated with people like Frederick Winslow Taylor, who would stand on factory floors with a stopwatch, timing workers' movements to shave off a few seconds here, a few calories of effort there.
Maximum efficiency.
Right. The goal of optimization is to isolate a specific variable speed, profit output, and push it to its absolute maximum limit, often at the expense of everything else around it.
It's a machine word. You optimize an engine to get the maximum possible horsepower, even if it means the engine burns out faster. And we applied that logic to everything.
We really did.
We optimized supply chains to be so lean that they completely collapsed during the pandemic because there was no slack in the system. We optimized social media algorithms for maximum user engagement, and it fractured our political reality.
Exactly. Optimization assumes a closed system where you can safely extract maximum value. But coherence is an ecological concept. It comes from the study of complex living systems. Coherence means harmony, resilience, and equilibrium within a deeply interconnected web.
If optimization is a factory, coherence is a forest.
That's perfectly put. In a healthy forest ecosystem, no single species is allowed to optimize itself endlessly.
What happens if it does?
Well, if a population of deer optimizes its grazing and reproduces without limits, it eats all the vegetation, the soil erodes, the food web collapses, and the deer eventually starve.
So they destroy themselves.
Right. The system loses coherence. A coherent system regulates itself. It values stability and mutual survival over the runaway dominance of any single part.
So the United Nations looking at global development through the lens of coherence rather than optimization means recognizing that pushing human economic or technological growth to the maximum limit is actively destroying the biosphere we rely on to exist. We can't optimize ourselves into oblivion. We have to figure out how to be coherent with the rest of the planet.
And that leads us directly into the grand contradiction that the alien anthropologist is observing.
Let's synthesize what we've uncovered so far.
Okay.
On one hand, we have human institutions acting out of deep exhaustion, lacking trust in the speed of the world, and building walled, sovereign fortresses to centralize their control. They are acting out of fear.
Right.
On the other hand, the intelligence they are trying to control is mimicking biology, escaping to the edges, and pushing the world toward a decentralized, ecological state of coherence.
It feels completely irreconcilable.
It does. We are building maximum security digital prisons, but we are filling them with millions of autonomous, decentralized agents that think for themselves at the edge. How can these two completely opposing forces exist at the exact same time without the whole system just tearing itself apart?
The dispatch addresses this head-on, and it does so by looking at the public sentiment beneath all this architectural noise. Despite the exhaustion of the leadership class, despite the allostatic load and the lack of trust driving the sovereignty reflex, the global polling data tells a different story.
What does the polling say?
The text notes that 71% of people globally still believe technology fundamentally makes the world better. And they specifically name AI as the most influential force for that betterment.
That is genuinely surprising. With all the doom scrolling, the anxiety over deepfakes, the fear of job displacement, nearly 3/4 of the planet is still fundamentally optimistic about the tools.
Yeah, they haven't given up.
They still see the promise of the technology, even while their governments are frantically building walls around it.
The source gives a beautiful name to this resilient optimism. It calls it structural aliveness.
Structural aliveness. I like that. It implies that the system isn't a rotting, dying thing. It has vitality. It has a pulse.
It implies a willingness to stay in relationship with the complexity of the world. The dispatch insists that 71% optimism isn't naivete. It's not that people don't see the dangers or feel the exhaustion.
Right, they aren't blind to it.
Exactly. It's that human beings possess a deep structural vitality. We persist. The text says this aliveness persists without permission. We continue to adapt, to tinker, to hope, even within the walled gardens.
So what does this all mean? It still leaves us with this massive tension, the tension between centralizing control sovereignty and distributing intelligence the edge. How does the alien anthropologist resolve this?
It doesn't resolve it.
It doesn't.
No, and that is actually the most clarifying insight in the entire text.
Yes.
It explicitly states that tension is not a problem to solve, it is the weather.
Oh, wow. Calling it the weather completely changes the stakes. You don't try to arrest a thunderstorm.
Precisely. Think about how humanity historically deals with the weather. If a massive blizzard is coming, you don't form a committee to figure out how to solve the blizzard.
Right. You can't optimize the snow away.
Exactly. You accept that it is a physical reality of a massive system undergoing a transition. You put on a coat. You adapt your behavior. You navigate it.
When we treat every global shift as a problem to solve, we end up feeling as massive failures because we can't fix it. If the tension between AI decentralization and government control is viewed as a problem, it causes endless anxiety.
Right, because it's an unfixable problem.
But if it is the weather, it's just the environment we currently live in. It's a paradigm shift. We are holding two opposing forces, and that friction isn't a glitch in the matrix. It is the natural state of things right now.
By framing it as the weather, the dispatch relieves us of the burden of needing a perfect architectural solution. It tells us that the friction is the defining characteristic of this era.
And speaking of defining characteristics, this deep dive builds to one final, truly perspective-shattering revelation.
It really does.
Because, as if framing our technological contradictions as planetary weather wasn't enough, the source material claims there is something fundamental we have completely missed about this entire shift to the edge.
Yes. The text forces us to confront our own deeply ingrained anthropocentric bias. When we looked at people leaving massive social media platforms for quiet group chats and choosing slowness, we analyzed it as a human cultural trend.
Right, we called it the human defection.
We thought we were making a sociological choice.
But the sensor array shows something far more profound. The dispatch states that the defection isn't just human. The defection is planetary.
The systems themselves are leaving the center. The text catalogs it. Edge computing nodes, microbes in the soil, root systems in forests, human social behaviors, and now advanced large language models are all moving toward local low-energy coordination.
Wait, really? Everything?
Everything. And then it delivers a sentence that requires a profound level of ego depth to truly accept. Humanity is not the protagonist of this shift. It is one node feeling the same pull.
Humanity is not the protagonist. Let that sink in. For all of recorded history, we have placed ourselves at the absolute center of the narrative. We view ourselves as the masters of the earth, the prime movers who invent technology to impose our will on nature.
That's our entire worldview.
Exactly. We thought our move away from loud, centralized platforms was our own brilliant cultural rebellion. But this dispatch is arguing that the move toward local, low-energy coordination is a physical law of the planet asserting itself right now.
It is akin to the Copernican revelation.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, before Copernicus, humanity believed the Earth was the center of the universe, and all the stars revolved around us. It was terrifying, but ultimately illuminating, to realize we were just one planet orbiting a star. This text is proposing a similar shift in our understanding of intelligence and systems.
We are just one node. We are experiencing the exact same gravitational pull as a machine or a tree. A mycelial network in a forest operates by local, low-energy coordination, fungi passing nutrients between tree roots without a central command center.
Right.
A multi-agent AI system operates by local, low-energy coordination with domain-specific models talking to each other at the edge. And humans seeking out quiet, local communities are doing the exact same thing.
We thought we were driving the bus, but we are just passengers feeling the shift in momentum.
Wow.
The entire planet is recoiling from the exhaustion of high-energy centralized optimization and being naturally pulled toward decentralized biological coherence. The physics of energy consumption demand it. The architecture of survival demands it.
It is incredibly humbling, honestly, but I also find it immensely liberating. If we are just a node, it relieves that crushing, impossible pressure of having to optimize and control every variable on Earth.
It does.
We don't have to carry the weight of being the protagonist. But it also demands profound responsibility. It demands that we learn how to simply be coherent with the rest of the planet, to participate in the ecosystem, rather than trying to constantly dominate it.
It demands a completely different way of existing. It means accepting the weather, engaging our structural aliveness, and building technology that harmonizes with biological limits rather than trying to conquer them.
Let's take a moment to retrace this incredible journey we've been on today. We started by looking at the sovereignty reflex, how human institutions, suffering from an allostatic load of exhaustion and a deep lack of trust in the speed of change, are frantically building walled digital fortresses, pulling their data back in a massive wave of geopatriation.
That's where it all started.
But beneath those walls, we found that silicon is refusing to stay centralized. To survive its own energy limits, technology is mimicking biology, acting like an octopus, and escaping to the edges of the network as specialized multi-agent systems.
We learned that this tension between control and decentralization isn't a problem to solve, but rather the planetary weather we must adapt to.
Right.
And we discovered that our shift away from optimization and toward coherence isn't a human invention, but a planetary pull that humans, machines, and nature are all experiencing simultaneously.
We are not the main character. We are just part of the constellation. Which leaves us with one final, haunting thought from the field notes. The dispatch ends with a very brief line. All quiet is also an option tomorrow. I want you, listening right now, to really mull that over. If humanity, if our AI, and if our ecology are all naturally defecting toward this local, low-energy, quiet coordination, what happens to the massive, loud, high-energy systems we still rely on every single day to run our lives?
The global supply chains, the mega clouds, the endless fees.
Exactly. Are we actually prepared to let those old, exhausted centers fall completely silent? And perhaps more importantly, on a personal level, in a world being pulled toward coherence, what does your own local, low-energy coordination look like tomorrow? Think about it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, and we will see you next time.